So that's point 3. And then point 4, after you heard that response of will you help me, then it's making the actual ask. And you can say it in a kind of a variety of ways, whatever fits your words the best, but you have to ask for a specific amount by a specific date. Okay? That's really important. If you don't write down anything else I tell you today, just write down that when you're trying to raise money, you got to ask for it, and you got to ask for a specific amount by a specific date. Okay? When the gas company or the cable company sends you a bill, it says you owe me $106.82 and it's due on the 26th. Or you start to pay me interest, or worse yet, you get your cable cut off. So what's the human instinct? Well, about the 24th, I'm going to dig around, find that stupid bill, and I'm going to go fetch my checkbook, and I'm going to write their little check, and I'm going to mail it. Right? I'm going to wait to the end, and I'm only going to write it for the amount they asked for. I'm not going to write it for a penny more. Okay? And rarely will you see a pledge that the contribution exceeds the pledge. Okay? If somebody says they're going to give you $500, they don't usually send you $1,000 or $750. They send you $500 or less. Okay? So that's important to understand. So you got to ask for a specific amount by a specific date. Okay? And let me give you an example of how it works. Candidate Jones goes out and asks, is it Dan? Don? I can't read. Don, will you give me some money for my campaign? And they walk away. Well, Don says, well, sure. And Don thinks in his mind, I'll give you 20 bucks, when it's convenient to Don, right? And not a minute sooner. So that's you'll hear that a lot, okay? And that couldn't be a worse example. The candidate thinks that they've raised some money in their head. They feel good about themselves. They feel like their campaign has some motion, is going forward, and that they've actually accomplished something. And the truth is, they really haven't accomplished anything. They've wasted everybody's time, and you just have to go back to Don and ask Don again. So the real way to ask Don is, Don, can I count on you to raise $100 by my important June 30 filing deadline? And then just like when you asked for the help before, then shut up. And wait for Don to give you his response. If Don's in person like we are now, and I'm looking him in the eye and I got a smooth rap, it's getting harder for Don to say no. His stomach's starting to, and your face heats up on the back of his neck, and he's going, I hate to say no. I don't want to disappoint the guy. And Don says, okay, fine. I'll give you $100. All right? Candidate walks away. Here's where candidates fall down. And this leads me to this follow-up thing. I get off this A to E thing. Sorry, folks. It's just I'm not a teacher, so I go around. But anyway, so So, okay, we got our pledge with Don, $100. Now, here's what a candidate does. They say, great, and they walk away, and that's the end of it. What happens then? Don and everyone like Don and all his pledges, whatever that cumulative amount would be, you'll get 25% of those pledges, okay? 25%. You say, no, they won't lie like that. They're not lying. It's just that people are busy. They don't want to disappoint other people. And then as you get on with your busy life, Don forgets that he made a $100 pledge, and nobody's going to remind him, and he kind of remembers, right, if he really thinks about it, but he doesn't really want to think about it because we don't wake up thinking about how to give money away today. That's not how it works, right? So you got to move Don to give that money. I've asked him in the right way, but what's going to happen now is if I don't send Don one piece of literature or one piece of follow-up, Don is not going to send his money. Or I should say, you're going to get Don's pledges times 25%. Okay, you understand what I'm saying there? If I send Don one piece of mail or one email follow-up with a link to give or a letter with a return envelope, whichever method you want to employ, I still suggest the old-fashioned hard copy letter with the remit envelope inside as your first piece of follow-up, just because weird people like me still want to write a check. I don't want to give online, Crazy, huh? So, okay, so Don and with his pledge, if I send him one piece of communication follow-up, I'm going to get about 50% of those pledges back. Okay? If I send him two pieces or more, I'm going to get about 75% of my pledges in. And in my experience, no matter how many more pieces after two you send them, you can't really move the needle past 75%. You can get it to 100 occasionally, here and there with like a subgroup of people that you know really well. But if you add up all your pledges, the BS factor, the attrition factor, if you will, is usually 25% of whatever your pledges are. Okay? So if we're trying to raise 100, we need to set our pledge goal really to 125, knowing that we're only going to get 100. or whatever those numbers work out to be. See what I mean? Okay, so again, you ask them correctly and then you follow up correctly to get 75% of what the actual amount they said they'd raise. And that's how it works. And if you do your 2 pieces of follow-up and you have a tight deadline that's 60 days or less, you ask them in the correct way, you're going to get about 75% of your pledge money back in. Yes?
And what was that 5th point of what you say?
Oh, right. After we ask for it, the 5th point is, and see how I forgot, a lot of times the candidate will get all wrapped up in it, they'll forget to thank them. And so I say number 5 is thank you. And I know that seems like a really simple kind of script, folks, but when I first got in this business, the candidate said to me, "Where's my call script?" And I went, "Oh, I don't know." So I went and I dutifully typed up a call script and, sent it to my mother, the English teacher, and said, "Grammar right, Mom?" "Oh yeah, real good." Gave it to the candidate. Candidate loved it. Well, it was like a stupid book report, right? It's like a 1-page book report, and the poor candidate read it like 4 times. I'm supposed to say, like one of those deals, and he read it. And on the 4th time, I was just horrified. And I said, Mr. Candidate, I don't think the script thing's a good idea. Let's just back it off, and you should say something like this, something like this. And so that's where I go with my 5 points. John Sharp asked for money differently than Governor Perry. Well, maybe those 2 are a bad example. They probably do ask for money similarly, but Tom DeLay and Lloyd Doggett, they certainly raise money in different ways, put it that way, okay? That's the point I'm trying to make. So the thank you is very important. Do we understand how once we get our pledges, how we follow up with them? Everybody, does that make sense? Okay, all right. So we talked about follow-up. Old school versus new. This is simply to say, to wrap it back up again a little bit and say to you that the internet is great and money's going to come from the internet. It's going to come from having, real aggressive web strategies and blogging and sending email updates and all this sort of thing. And you're going to raise money that way. And the more you work it, the more you will raise money. But I hear folks a lot of times say, well, that's the only way I'm going to raise money. Well, no. I want you to understand that this new stuff is very cool and it's great and it's a good way, that's where the future of it's headed. But right now, and even in the next 6 to 8 years, if you all are out and about doing this, it still starts with finding the right targets and calling them and physically asking them for a contribution and asking them in the right way and then following up with it, okay? And so I want to make that point because it is important what's going on online as far as how we raise money, but please remember it always starts with that core group that you're calling and that you're really working hard to cultivate to raise money. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
A little bit more about the thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Would you throw a party for the people, like an appreciation party for those, I guess, the greatest contributors, or that way, just so they can network and they can mingle, and just kind of a sense of that camaraderie?
If you can afford it, absolutely. And what I try and do, you'll hear a lot of people say, let's have a finance committee meeting. I'm not a huge fan of the finance committee meeting, but I am a huge fan of getting your biggest donors together in a room as often as possible and giving them sort of what seems like insider information and scoop, if you will, about what's going on with your campaign. So in other words, your big donor, just like your party chair, your activist, or whoever in your campaign that wants to be real involved and know everything about the campaign and help, you need to treat donors the same way, They need to be in on, well, this is what I'm doing, and here's my newsletter this week, and here's my email update. Because think about it, if I'm a donor, I'm invested in your campaign. I've bought the stock, if you will, of X campaign. And so, just like a company, we would want to keep our stockholders very happy. And what do we want to do in a political campaign? We want to take those original stockholders and quadruple them, typically, okay? And it doesn't necessarily mean we get new stockholders, although we want them. You just sell more shares to those same folks, okay? So it's very important to keep your finance committee people invested and feeling a part of the process. On big campaigns I've done, we'll have a weekly conference call with 20 or 30 of our big wigs and say, this is what we did this week, and and what do you think, Joe, and all that deal.